Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I had been using a few dating apps casually to meet new people. I've probably made more friends than a significant other, but it is what it is. I did have one pretty crazy experience though, that kind of turned me off to the whole thing for a few months. I matched with a guy that started his message with a blurb from one of my favorite books that I listed on the site. I thought that it was pretty impressive because it wasn't a mainstream or popular book either. So this guy either had read it too or looked into it just to send this. And to be honest, it was a cheesy mystery/romance, so I doubted that he actually read it. But to take the time to look into it stood out to me, and I like that. I am a sucker for the grossly romantic stuff, so he had already piqued my interest. We started talking, and probably after about a week, he asked me to dinner. I told him that I would if he told me truthfully if he had read the book or not, and to my surprise, he admitted that he knew nothing of it until he saw my profile and then he looked into it. We both had a good laugh and I appreciated his honesty, and then we set a date. He said he wanted to pick me up from my place. I lived in an apartment, so I just told him the name of the complex and the building. That way, my exact unit was unknown, just in case, and I waited out front. I got a text saying that he would be there within 2 minutes, and I was in awe when I looked up to see not a fancy car or a limo, but a horse-drawn carriage. The guy got out, and while the carriage was gorgeous, I was thankful that he wasn't in a suit and tie, as I would have been way underdressed. He said this was the proper way to pick me up since I was a romantic like himself. I thought it was incredibly sweet and thoughtful, if not a little embarrassing since it was starting to draw attention. It wasn't a bad embarrassment, but like when you're called out at work for doing a good job and you don't expect it, something like that. So then he helped me up and we headed to the restaurant, which was in a very upscale part of town. Dinner was fantastic. I had never been to this place as it would normally be way out of my budget, but after asking to go elsewhere because I didn't want to assume that he would pay, or in the off chance the date was a flop, I could just pay and leave quickly. He insisted that we should go there and not to worry about the cost as he was covering everything, so I just let it go. He got a bottle of wine, and I had the best shrimp Alfredo that I have ever had in my life. Our personalities also clicked so well. We had many things in common, and even our pet peeves lined up. After dinner, we decided to walk around the plaza where there was a huge fountain. It was just a lot of fun, and I was pretty into this guy. After about half an hour or so, he said that we could just ride around in the carriage some, but said that he wanted to stop by his place to grab something. I honestly wasn't ready to end the night, so I was more than willing to go with him. His place was probably about 20 minutes out from the plaza area. It was a cute little 2-story house with a big fenced-in front yard. When we stopped, he said that he would be right back and then hopped out. But then the driver of the carriage also hopped out and followed him in the house. I sat there, kind of curious, but again, was probably clouded by how great a night it had been. I went to pull out my phone, and I started to text my friend, when I started hearing people talking and getting closer. I looked over to see my date, the driver, as well as an older woman and 4 other people walking towards the carriage smiling. They had all come out of my date's house. I stayed where I was until my date approached and offered his hand, asking if I would step out for a moment. I didn't know what was going on, so I just accepted and then got out. As soon as I stepped out, He introduced me to everyone around. This was his family. His dad was the carriage driver the whole time. The older lady was his mom, and the four other people were his siblings. Well, I still thought the carriage was romantic. From what I got out of him, he didn't really choose it. That was their normal means of transportation. None of them had a car. Then, I started getting bombarded by questions from his mother and his two sisters. Mom asked me about the flowers that I like, my dress size, what type of design I preferred, saying that she'll be making it for me. I was confused as to what was going on. Then I saw his mom snatch the daughter by the arm to move her out of the way. I was then face to face with my date until he fell to one knee. And then he held out this giant old-looking ring that was pretty clearly not going to fit me anyways. Everyone was standing there, silently and smiling. I didn't know where I was or what to even say. Obviously, I wanted to say no. I just met this guy, but it was so awkward that nothing was coming out of me. And when I did finally get my voice back, all I could muster was, I need to go. I'm guessing they were all really expecting a straight answer by the look on their faces. But my date quickly stood up and then brought me back to the carriage. I told him that I could get a ride so as to not be a bother, but he insisted on taking me home. So we both climbed in the back and his father in the front. Now, the ride back was pretty damn awkward. We hardly spoke, and when we did, I felt like he was just talking to talk. He mentioned how he knew a house nearby that was for sale. He told me some facts about an old garage school nearby that was now sitting empty. And of course, even the weather. Once we got to my place, he tried walking into the building with me, but I stopped him at the door. He asked me when we would see each other again, and I told him that I wasn't sure and to have a good night. He even tried to go in for a kiss, and I just backed up and went inside. I called my friend immediately and I told her what all had happened and agreed with her that I needed to put an end to that immediately, as to not lead him on or give him any ideas. We hardly knew each other, and he was already wanting to get married? That's insane. So I messaged him that night and I told him that it wasn't going to work out and I wished him the best. That went on longer than it needed to, as he kept pushing as to what was wrong since the date seemed to go so well. This guy really acted like the dating site was a planned marriage or something. I had to explain to him, like I would my grandparents, how it's used. He was still adamant that I was the one, and then he started spouting off some religious stuff that I couldn't follow. So I basically ended it at "we're done here, do not message me again, and then good luck in the future." I figured that that would be the end of it, but other than the random texts here and there, he also tried to add me on Facebook, and when that wouldn't work out, he tried adding my friends, telling them lies about things that I apparently told him on our date. He even tracked me down on some future dates that I had gone on with other guys, and even on a business lunch, claiming that I cheated on him and called me some colorful names. Thankfully, he didn't stick around when he started being threatened by my friends and also my co-workers. I did have one date leave during the event, saying that he didn't want to be involved, but to be honest, I can't say I blame him. And while this was all very stressful and ruined some potential things for me, the worst part of it all was when I saw him standing out front of my complex, just staring up at it. He still had no idea which one I was in, and I think that was probably the only thing that stopped him from going any further. I was just worried that one day he would be out there as I was leaving or coming home, and then I worried what his intentions were. At one point though, he did add my ex and we were on good terms, so he told me about it and what he was telling him too. My ex actually said a few things back to him. I don't know what exactly because he wouldn't tell me, but I never heard from him again. So, it's probably best that I don't know. I do apologize if this wasn't all that creepy, but there were definitely a mix of emotions during this time. So again, it was pretty stressful. I still use the same dating app, and I'm still a sucker for romantic stuff. But I make sure to drive myself now. I actually have two dating stories that should be pretty quick, hopefully. And they're not necessarily horror as in scary, but they're horror in the sense that they were horrifying and turned me off online dating pretty much altogether. I don't think much backstory is really needed for me, beyond the fact that I was in my mid-20s, have never had luck with meeting people that I care to really spend time with, and I wasn't exactly picky with who I swiped match on. When I say I wasn't picky, I mean that as long as they were a guy above a 3 on a scale of 10 and didn't throw any major super creep vibes, I was pretty much willing to give them a try. I know this may have been really dumb, but I'm the kind of person that is really willing to give anyone a shot to see if we vibe, if that makes any sense to you. Anyways, on to the first date story. I had matched with a guy named Jake on one of the apps, and he seemed like a pretty straightforward guy. His profile was pretty much your basic mid-20s guy that was into tech and fitness, two things that were actually bonuses for me. He and I spoke for a while, sent a few photos, had a few phone calls, and he was pretty much the most normal guy that I have ever spoken with. I was totally okay with normal. In fact, that was what I was looking for more than anything. We agreed to meet up for lunch at a small diner-like restaurant and set a date. The day comes and I show up first, and I then get the table for the two of us. As I'm sitting there, just waiting, I get a text from Jake saying that he had some car troubles and that he's going to be a few minutes late, but he was 100% not ghosting me. That was fine with me. I get it. I've had my share of "why won't my rust bucket start?" kind of moments. I tell him that I'm at the table and that it's totally fine and that I understand and so forth and so on. After about 20 or so more minutes, he finally walks into the restaurant and to our table. But he looks like he just had a panic attack. He was sweating, and it was early spring, so it was still pretty chilly outside, and he just looked distressed and disheveled overall. He sits down, and immediately just kind of looks like he lost all sense of the situation, like something happened and he's freaking out, but can't make it not obvious that he's freaking out. I ask him if he's okay and what was going on, and he just kind of starts looking like he's about to start sobbing. And as soon as that happens, I hear shouting, and I see several cops running into the restaurant telling him to get down on his knees and arresting him. It took me a few minutes to convince them that I was already there at the restaurant and that I was not with him prior to the minute that he walked in. Thankfully, the host and the server could vouch for me on that though. Come to find out, on his way to the date, Mr. Jake had actually hit someone with his car and then kept going. I don't mean like he sideswiped or bumped someone else's car. I mean that he literally hit a person and ran over their leg, causing major injury, and then he kept going to meet up with me at the restaurant. I'm assuming that I was supposed to be an alibi, or I would have been if he hadn't been looked for by the police. So obviously, that date ended pretty quickly with him being shoved into the back of a cruiser, and me just staring at the floor like, oh my god, what am I doing with my life? Thankfully, the waiter was sympathetic and didn't make me pay for my drink, which was nice. At least, I got a free Dr. Pepper out of the situation. This second one, though, is the one that's not necessarily scary, but it's still what I would consider a dating horror story. It was, once again, a story where I met up with a guy that I met on one of those dating apps. This one was a guy named Chris. Chris's profile was a bit above the others that I looked at on the apps, because Chris was actually pretty attractive and was all about staying fit as he was a former military. Now, I've never been with a military guy, but I know a few of them, my brother for one, and I found out that I can tolerate most of them, and they can even be fun to hang out with. Talking with Chris went pretty smoothly at first, though he seemed to have a really strict I can't chat with you before 8 p.m. kind of schedule about him, which had me initially concerned that he may have been a married man looking for an affair. I figured that I would at least see it through to the first date and see if I could spot an indentation on his ring finger, or try to ask him what it was all about. I mean, it could have been that he had a job that he worked until then and couldn't have his phone. Or maybe he just had other adult responsibilities that he had to see too. I was willing to be patient with him and get my answers. So, we scheduled a date for dinner. That 8 p.m. rule made it hard to do anything else, and I was looking forward to it. Once again, I was early to the date and I got a table for us. Then, when he finally shows up to the date, he walks in with another woman. I was a bit confused and taken aback that he would have the audacity to bring someone else to the date like that. But it was even more awkward when he sat down and said, "It's very nice to finally meet you in person. This is my mother." This man literally brought his mother on the date without warning. Now, mind you, if his mother had needed his care or been disabled, then I would have no issue with it, assuming that he would have informed me beforehand. But this woman was quite fit and able to take care of herself, and she was definitely there because she wanted to be there. What was weirder, at no point did Chris act like this was a weird thing. He just kept up the conversation as if she wasn't there. And then, it hit the apex of, "Oh my god, this is so awkward." When it came time to order, he tried to order one thing, and then his mother told him no, and then told the waiter something else. When the waiter walked away, he tried to tell his mom that he wanted the other thing, almost whining like a little kid. But she told him that it was too fatty and that he needed to watch his carbs. I just kind of sat there like, what? Was this woman really ordering for her adult former military son like this while he was on a date? Again, I know this wasn't scary, but it was definitely my "nope, I'm done" moment here. The entire date was so strange, and I pretty much ghosted him after this. I tried to think that maybe I was just being shallow about the whole thing, but it was just too much. Chris was actually my last date through any of those apps, and I kind of embraced being single for a while for reasons that I think are pretty obvious. Breakups are never easy, but my last one hit me harder than I expected. I'm Adam, and I'm a 28-year-old guy who thought that he had it all figured out until my relationship fell apart. For weeks, I was a mess, barely eating, hardly sleeping, and just going through the motions of daily life. Eventually, I decided that it was time to move on. My friends encouraged me to get back out there. So, what else would I do? I downloaded a few dating apps, hoping to find a connection that might fill the void. Swiping through the profiles became a daily routine. There was a mix of excitement and skepticism. I matched with several girls, but most turned out to be bots or people who weren't really interested. The genuine conversations were few and far between, and I really started to lose hope. But then, one day, I matched with a girl named Bethany. She seemed different, genuine. Her profile was filled with pictures of her smiling and just enjoying life, and her bio was simple yet intriguing. We started chatting on the app, and for the first few days, everything felt normal. There were no red flags, just easy conversations, and also a growing interest from me to her. After a few days of chatting, we decided to move the conversation off the app. We added each other on Snapchat, and soon, we were talking every single day. We called each other, we shared stories, and laughed about our lives. It felt like we were really connecting. I started to think that maybe, just maybe, I had found someone special. After about a week of talking, I decided that it was time to ask her out on a date. A coffee date seemed perfect, casual, no pressure. But when I suggested it, Bethany hesitated. She explained that her family was somewhat conservative and that it would be best if our first date was at her house. She invited me over for dinner with her parents, followed by a movie in their basement. She assured me that her parents were fine with us being alone down there. At first, I felt a little bit reluctant. Bethany was 27 and still lived with her parents, and the whole setup seemed just a bit strange to me. But I really did like her, and I told myself that maybe her family was just really close-knit and protective. Those kind of people. So I decided to give it a chance, and I agreed to the plan. We set the date for the coming Saturday at 6 p.m. Bethany gave me her address, and the countdown began. Saturday arrived. With a mix of excitement and apprehension, I drove to the address Bethany had provided, and I half expected to find a rundown or eerie house. But to my surprise, it was a beautiful, well-kept home in a nice suburban neighborhood. The lawn was perfectly manicured, and the house itself looked like it looked something out of a family sitcom. The exterior was a classic American home, if you know what I mean. White picket fence, flower beds, and a welcoming front porch with a swing. I texted Bethany to let her know that I had arrived, and the front door opened. Bethany stepped out, looking exactly like her pictures, beautiful and well put together. And standing just behind her were two people, a man and a woman, whom I assumed to be her parents. They greeted me warmly, and as I approached the house, her mother made a strange remark about me feeling at home because this would be my home soon too. I found the comment odd, but I just brushed it off as a quirky attempt at being welcoming. Her father also mentioned something about not being bothered by the decorations inside, saying that they were a bit religious, but that I would soon understand and accept them. To be honest, I was actually feeling increasingly uneasy, but I just followed them inside. Based on what I have seen outside of their house, I'm gonna be honest with you. Nothing could have prepared me of what I would see inside. The interior of their house was a stark contrast to the exterior. The walls were adorned with bizarre symbols and statues that gave off a cult-like vibe. There were various ornaments, some strange masks, talismans, and sculptures that seemed to stare at me as I walked past. One wall had a mural depicting a hooded figure surrounded by what looked like worshippers. Another had a series of shelves filled with jars containing who knows what. It was unsettling to say the least. All throughout, Bethany remained silent, her eyes fixed on me in a way that really made me uncomfortable. And I was starting to regret coming here. They then guided me to the dining room, where an old woman and a little boy were already seated. I assumed the boy was Bethany's younger brother. I said hello and then I took a seat, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread in the pit of my stomach. At first, the conversation was actually normal. They asked me basic things about my life, about my job, my interest. I tried to focus on the conversation and convince myself that they were just quirky and overly religious at the same time. When Bethany's mom brought in the food, it actually looked delicious and I was excited to eat. But before we started chowing down, her father insisted on saying a prayer. We all had to hold hands, and the prayer was unlike anything that I have ever heard. They thanked a chosen one for the blessings, and Bethany was praised for bringing a new lamb to their house. The words made my stomach churn. I got so nervous, and I actually gagged. It was a good thing that I did, because after the prayer, Bethany's mom asked if I was okay. And instantly, I thought about a lie. I lied and I said that I was feeling sick, but I assured them that it was nothing serious. I claimed that I had some medication in my car that I needed to take. Her mom protested, saying that she had medicine, but I insisted and I stood up, walking swiftly to the door. I didn't look back as I ran to my car. I then got in and I locked the doors. My heart pounded as I started the engine and then I drove as fast as I could. I did not stop until I reached a gas station. My hands were shaking and I felt a rush of relief and fear. I checked my phone, expecting a message from Bethany, but there was nothing. So I just blocked her number and I uninstalled the app. I grabbed a drink from the gas station just to calm my nerves, and then I drove home, still glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see them following me. It's almost been a year since that night, and this memory still haunts me. Every now and then, I find myself thinking about the bizarre decorations and that eerie prayer. I wonder what could have happened if I had stayed. Would they have tried to indoctrinate me into their strange cult? If it was a cult, would I have been able to leave at all? These thoughts keep me awake at night sometimes, but I'm just grateful that I trusted my instincts and I got out when I did. So, that was my creepy experience. I just want to say that please, be careful with who you meet online and always trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore it. The world can be a strange and dangerous place, and you never know what kind of people are out there. So Bethany, and probably your cult family, let's not meet again. I've been bouncing between a few different dating apps for a few years now, and while I'm still not in a long-term relationship, it hasn't all been bad. I've at least met a few people that have become good friends with me. But I do have one date that was very memorable for different reasons. I'll start by saying that I found my date on an app that was heavily used by the LGBTQ community. I am a female, and I ended up coming across a woman that I'll refer to as Jody. She was gorgeous. She had a few pictures on her profile, but her bio was kind of lacking. She gave a few things about herself and what she was looking for in a partner, but that was about it. Unfortunately, I'm used to seeing a fake profile on occasion in catfishers, so I wasn't hesitant, but I guess I was thinking that I would either find a good date or find another account to report. I was surprised when I got a response back within a reasonable time, and it didn't seem like a canned response. She greeted me and made small talk about herself and what her interests were. She even apologized if she seemed dull and short answered, as she explained that she was new to this and just recently accepted who she was. This made me feel a bit better about her being a genuine person, because it's normal for people to be withdrawn and shy. So I was ready and willing to take her under my wing and help her feel comfortable with herself. We started talking more and quite frequently, daily even. It all stayed within this app though, as she said she wasn't ready to talk or text via phone. I could understand that, especially if she hadn't come out to her friends and family. So, it was probably about 3 weeks of us talking. I wasn't too confident that we would ever meet, or at least not in the near future. So I started accepting the fact that she may just be a new friend, which was definitely fine. However, she did finally ask about meeting up casually for drinks or something, and I was all for it. Jody and I agreed to meet at a bar and grill that was about midway for both of us. She was already there when I showed up, and she looked just like her photos, except her hair was a little longer. She was sitting at the bar, looking around the front for what I would assume would be me. I walked over to her and she hugged me immediately and had the biggest smile on her face. We ordered drinks and wings and just continued our conversation from the app. It was just like we knew each other for years. We could finish each other's sentences, and we had the same sense of humor, and she just genuinely seemed to have a lot of fun. Like I could tell that this was the true Jody. This was who she wanted to be. She grabbed my hand a few times and said that she really appreciated me being so patient with her. It wasn't a big deal to me. I would like to assume that anyone meeting new people would do the same, but I know we don't live in a perfect world. And now, the date was going great, perfect even in my opinion. But one thing I noticed was how her phone went off quite a bit, and she would constantly look down at it. However, other than looking at it or swiping the notifications away, she stayed off of it. I'm sure many people would find it rude, and if she was constantly on it, I would have probably had a different opinion on it. But I couldn't help but notice that when she did look at it, her mood seemed to change. Her smile would slowly fade, and then she would look back up at me and then smile. At some point in the night, her phone lit up with a phone number, but I couldn't see the name on it. It was obviously a phone call. It was obvious that it was getting to her based on her size and how her swiping to dismiss it was getting more and more eccentric. So I just told her, "If you need to answer someone, I totally get it. It's fine." She immediately started apologizing, and I assured her that I wasn't upset. It just seemed like it was important, and I suggested that she take it if she needed to. She thanked me and then excused herself, saying that she would be right back. I watched as she walked to the front and started talking on her phone. From the look on her face and hand motions, I could tell that it was not a pleasant conversation. When it was finally over, she walked back and again apologized for that, and now clearly upset. She explained that it was her ex and that they split up over a month ago, but wouldn't leave her alone. Given the situation we were in, and since she didn't say much more about them, I just assumed that it was a bitter ex and didn't want to ask because she obviously didn't want to talk about it. So, we pushed it aside and then continued with our date. After we finished our last drinks, we decided to head out for the night. I was pretty smitten with her, so when she looked down at her phone one more time and then asked if she could spend some more time at my place, I definitely agreed. She wanted to leave her car there and just ride home with me. We walked to my car and then got in and continued our conversation on our way home. The parking lot at my apartment was pretty limited, and since I was getting back late, I was going to have to parallel park. And there was a car behind me, so I rolled down my window to let them go by before I started. As they were passing, they slowed down, almost to a stop right next to me. At first, I was about to make a comment about them being in the way when Jody said, "Oh my God," and then exclaimed, "That's my ex's car." It was too dark for me to see a person inside. They may have had tinted windows too, but it was hard to tell. But they did have a lighter colored stripe down the side, so I assumed that's how she could tell. I definitely wasn't ready to deal with an ex on a first date, but I was ready to call the cops if necessary. So after they finally passed me, I parked and then got out. I was ready for confrontation with some crazy lady. But what I did not expect was this burly football player guy to get out. Crap, all I could think in my head was, he wouldn't start a fight with a girl, right? He immediately yelled at me, demanding to know who I was and what Jody was doing with me. And before I could say anything, Jody jumped in and said that I was a coworker and that we had just had dinner and that I was going to show her my guinea pig because she was thinking of getting one. I did have a guinea pig, so I guess that wasn't a lie. I just stood there, letting her talk to see where this would lead. However, as his tone became more and more aggressive, I put my keys between my fingers and unlocked my phone. She was over on my side of the car already, so as he got closer and closer to her, I could tell that she was visibly shaken. I didn't like where this was going, so I approached them, saying that he needed to step back. But before I could finish, I was punched in the jaw with enough force to make me fall backwards. I was trying to regain my composure and trying to figure out what exactly just happened when I heard Jody screaming. I stood up and I saw that she had run to the other side of my car and that this guy had just grabbed her by the hair, dragging her to his car. I was terrified. I'm far from being a small girl, but there was no way that I was going to be able to stop this guy. I quickly called 911, but thought that I needed to do something right then and there for her. There was no way of knowing what would happen to her if he left with her, if he was willing to deck a total stranger, and a girl at that. So, I ran to them screaming for someone to call for help, shouting out my address and grabbing Jody from the front to hold her back. I was trying to hold her hair so it wasn't ripped out, but he was fighting me the whole time. And thank God, someone walking their dog noticed all of this and immediately ran to us. He started fighting the ex, and the dog was biting the ankles until he finally gave up. He then let go of Jody and turned his anger on this good Samaritan. He didn't get any hits on him before the cops showed up though, and he was detained, and I'm sure as hell pressed charges on him. Once he was out of sight, we all talked to the cops, and that's when I learned that this guy was just as abusive to Jody behind closed doors as he was that night in public. She finally had the courage to split, but he didn't accept that. She was very apologetic and embarrassed, but it's not like it was her fault, so I still invited her in to calm down. We talked more that night, and she ended up staying, so she knew that she had a safe place to go in case that he got out somehow. To sum it up, Jody and I became really close. Our romantic relationship didn't really work out for us, but she has become a really good friend, and in fact, we live together. I at least was able to convince her to file a restraining order and block him everywhere that she could, so she finally stopped hearing from him. I do joke with her though, that was definitely the most memorable first date that I have ever been on. I used to believe in fairy tales. I thought that once you found your soulmate, you would live happily ever after. That's how things felt with Charlie. We met when I was 24 at a Korean themed fair. The vibrant colors, the sweet aroma of street food, and the cheerful music set the perfect backdrop for our first meeting. I remember the day vividly. I was intrigued by a traditional fan dance. When someone accidentally nudged me, causing me to spill my drink, I turned around ready to confront the person. But instead, I met Charlie's apologetic eyes. Our connection was instant, like a spark igniting a flame. Charlie was sweet in ways that I had never experienced before. He had this habit of cutting the crust off my sandwiches because he knew that I didn't like them. He would fold napkins into little swans whenever we dined out because he knew how much I adored them. His love for anime and poetry added layers to his personality that made him really irresistible. He would write me poems, simple yet profound, and we would watch our favorite anime series late into the night. I loved every moment we spent together, no matter how mundane or extraordinary it was. For years, our relationship blossomed, and we eventually got engaged. We planned our future together, dreaming of a beautiful wedding and a life filled with love and laughter. He would often joke about how many kids he wanted. But life had other plans. Just a few months before our wedding, Charlie was involved in a tragic car accident. He didn't survive, and my world shattered into pieces. The love of my life was gone, and I was left to pick up the fragments of what could have been. I was heartbroken. I was unable to see myself with anyone else. The pain was just unbearable, and it took years for me to even consider moving on. Years passed, and although the wound never fully healed, I knew that it was my time to try again. My name's Valerie, by the way, and I'm 34 now. I'm a teacher who had poured myself into my work just to escape the loneliness. My friends, seeing my struggle, have been encouraging me to put myself out there again. One of them actually even set up a date for me, insisting that I deserved happiness too. I knew she was right, but it was just so hard for me. I reluctantly agreed. I wanted to humor my friend who tried so hard for this. The date was set for a Friday evening at a charming restaurant downtown. My friend assured me that the guy was nice and that I would enjoy his company. I wasn't convinced, but I decided to give it a try. After all, what did I have to lose? The day of the date arrived and I was nervous as I made my way to the restaurant. My heart was pounding in anticipation. I haven't done this in so long. I don't even know how to act or what to do. What if I say something stupid? I was panicking a little in my head. I arrived a few minutes early and I sat down at a table by the window. I tried to calm my nerves, reminding myself that this was just a date, nothing more, nothing less. After a few minutes, my date arrived. He was handsome, with a kind smile and a confident demeanor. He introduced himself as Daniel, a 36-year-old architect. He seemed genuinely pleased to meet me, and I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe this wouldn't be so bad at all. He sat down, and then we ordered our food. While we waited, we chatted about our lives. As we talked, Daniel began fiddling with his napkin, and to my surprise, he folded it into a swan, just like Charlie used to do. It was a small gesture, but it struck a chord deep within me. I brushed it off as a coincidence, telling myself that anyone could fold the napkin into a swan. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Our food arrived shortly after. Daniel ordered a salmon steak, which happened to be Charlie's favorite dish. I ordered a simple sandwich with some sides because I wasn't really feeling a heavy dinner. When Daniel saw my sandwich, he offered to remove the crust for me. I was taken aback by this. From an outsider's perspective, it might have seemed like either a kind gesture or maybe even a weird one, but to me, it was eerily familiar. I asked him why he offered that, and he simply said that it looked like I didn't like the crust. I tried to stay calm on the outside, but internally I was freaking out. The similarities between Daniel and Charlie were unnerving. As we continued to talk, I found myself feeling strangely comfortable with him, as if I had known him for years. His mannerism, his interest, and even his quirks reminded me of Charlie. Curiosity got the best of me, and I blurted out a question about his hobbies. By any chance, do you like writing poems? Daniel nodded and said yes. He started going more into the things that he likes and enjoys. And if you've guessed that he likes anime, then you're absolutely right. There were of course other hobbies he mentioned, but those two stuck out to me. I felt a chill run down my spine. These were things that Charlie loved, and I thought to myself, did my friend tell him these things in advance? Was this some kind of sick joke they're playing at me? But then I also realized that my friend, or anyone else for that matter, does not know these things. There was no way that Daniel could have known these details in advance. Maybe I was just reading into things too much. The rest of the date went well, almost too well. Daniel was charming, attentive, and we had a great conversation, but I couldn't ignore the weird feeling inside me. Physically, Daniel and Charlie were different, but their personalities and quirks were strikingly similar. It was as if fate was playing a cruel joke on me. After the date, Daniel texted me asking for a second one. I didn't know what to do. Part of me was really drawn to him because of the uncanny resemblance to Charlie, but another part of me was freaked out by it. I asked my friend if she had told Daniel anything about Charlie, but she vehemently denied it. She insisted that she hadn't shared any personal details and that she just thought that Daniel seemed like a great guy on his own. I was torn. Should I say yes to a second date, knowing that Daniel reminded me so much of Charlie, or should I protect myself from the emotional turmoil that might follow? My mind is a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. If you have any advice, please don't hesitate to let me know. I would really appreciate it. The world of online dating is a strange and often unpredictable place. After a recent breakup, I found myself drifting through the maze of dating apps, just hoping to find someone who could bring a spark back to my life. My name is Lindy, and I'm 26 years old. I was ready to meet strangers with the hope of finding a genuine connection again. I didn't want to use dating apps at this age, but with my schedule at work, and also me being an introvert, it was really hard to find a connection by myself. So I ended up downloading those apps. After spending countless hours scrolling through different profiles and engaging in superficial conversations, I finally matched with a guy named Derek. From his profile, Derek seemed like a nice, ambitious guy. He was so well dressed in his photos, he was always smiling, and his bio was filled with his humble brags about his successful career and his love for outdoor adventures. He seemed so genuine, and our initial chat was pleasant. He was attentive with the things that I said, he asked interesting questions, and he seemed to be eager to get to know me. So, after a few days of chatting, And when Derek asked me out on a date, I of course agreed, and I just hoped for the best. We decided to meet at a popular restaurant downtown. It was known for its cozy ambience and excellent food, though a little bit pricey, but it's fine. I didn't mind splurging a little bit. The night of the date, I dressed in a simple but elegant outfit. I was hoping to make a good impression on Derek. I arrived a few minutes early because I wanted to settle in and gather my thoughts. When Derek walked in, he looked just like his pictures. He was tall, confident, and very well groomed. I was actually very excited. He greeted me warmly, and I felt an initial sense of relief that he wasn't a catfish. We were seated at a nice table, and the evening started off smoothly. Derek was charming and seemed genuinely interested in me, and I thought that this might actually work out. I was already planning in my head on where the second date would be. However, things took a turn when the waiter arrived to take our order. Derek's demeanor changed instantly. He became overbearing, insisting on ordering not just for himself but for me as well, without even asking what I wanted. He picked the dishes that he claimed were the best, and while I appreciated his enthusiasm, it felt so controlling on my end. I just tried to brush it off, thinking it might be a quirk or a misguided attempt to impress me. But as the evening progressed, Derek's behavior grew more and more unsettling. He was incredibly proud and rude to the waiter. He was snapping at him for the smallest things and making snide remarks about the service. At one point, he even tried to embarrass the waiter by comparing their financial statuses, boasting about his own wealth and implying that the waiter was inferior for not having as much money as him. I could see the discomfort in the waiter's eyes, and I felt a pang of sympathy for him. To be honest, now that I think about it, I actually regret not standing up for him. But I think I was just so taken aback and so confused, and maybe a bit scared of Derek too. Derek didn't stop there. He made a point to claim that I was his girlfriend, despite it being our first date. He told the waiter that someone like him could easily afford someone like me, implying that I was some sort of trophy. The possessiveness and arrogance of this guy just made my skin crawl. What started as a promising date quickly turned into a nightmare. My initial attraction to Derek evaporated with each passing minute and every single time that he opened his mouth. His attempts to dominate the conversation, his disrespect towards the waiter, and his awful behavior just left a sour taste in my mouth. I realized that he wasn't the charming, considerate person that he had initially appeared to be at all. Instead, he was this controlling, arrogant, and disrespectful asshole, qualities that I found deeply unattractive. I knew that I had to get through the rest of the date gracefully, but I also knew that I would never go out with Derek again. I just tried to remain polite and composed, nodding along to his stories and fake laughs, while counting down the minutes until I could leave. When the check finally arrived, I offered to pay my part, but Derek made a grand show of paying for everything, further assisting his sense of superiority. After the date, I thanked him for the evening and I made my way home. I didn't want him to send me back home because I did not want an asshole like him knowing where I lived. When I got back home, I was feeling a mix of relief and disappointment. I had hoped for a nice time and maybe a potential connection, but instead, I had encountered a side of a person, Derek, that was both alarming and off-putting. I decided not to respond to any more of his messages. it was clear that we were not a match at all, and I wanted to avoid any further interaction with him. Over the next few days, Derek tried reaching out multiple times, sending text messages and leaving voicemails, and I just ignored them, hoping that he would get the hint. But then, one evening, I received a text message from Derek, and it was just filled with hate. He was accusing me of leading him on and calling me all sorts of hurtful names. He berated me for ignoring him and made it clear that he was furious about my lack of response. Text was so unsettling, and it left me feeling shaken. His kind and charming facade had completely crumbled, revealing a bitter and vindictive side. I decided to just block his number and delete any trace of our conversation. It was clear that Derek was not someone that I wanted in my life, even in the most peripheral way. And no, absolutely not. So, to anyone who's trying to get into the world of online dating, I share my story as a cautionary tale. Be mindful of people that you meet and the personas that they project. Trust your instincts and don't ignore the red flags, even if red might be your favorite color, and no matter how subtle they may seem. In my case, it was not subtle at all. Kidding aside though, Derek, let's not meet again. I do hope that you find the self-awareness to change your ways, but that's gonna be a journey you'll have to take on your own. As for me, I'll continue my search for a genuine connection. This is a story that I never thought I'd have to tell. I'm Nina and I'm 28 years old, and several months ago, I found myself in a situation that still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. I met Kevin when I was new to my company. He worked in the IT department while I worked in a different department on another floor. Our paths crossed when I had to get my company-issued laptop set up. Kevin was one of the ID guys responsible for onboarding new employees. He was charming, funny, and he made me feel at ease in a new environment. We hit it off almost immediately, and after a few casual conversations, he asked me out on a date. To be exact, we went out on 3 dates before deciding to make it official. I know how it sounds. Just know that I was lonely and it was hard for me to find a guy that I would like. So when I found Kevin, I didn't mind jumping into a relationship so quickly. The first couple of weeks were great. It was filled with the typical new relationship energy. However, it didn't take long for our differences to show. Well, 2 months exactly. Kevin and I had fundamental differences that we just couldn't work out. For one, he didn't like animals, which was a huge deal breaker for me. I have 2 dogs and 3 cats, and they are like family to me. At first, I just thought that Kevin wasn't used to animals, but his disdain for my pets was clear as day, and he often complained about the cost and attention that they required. Well, the final straw came one night when he casually suggested that I should consider giving them away or abandoning them, especially if we ever got serious and decided to get married. This was a conversation that he brought up 2 months into the relationship. Well, that was it for me. I couldn't be with someone who didn't love and respect my pets as I did. So, I ended it that same day. Looking back at it now, I'm actually glad that he showed his true colors so early into the relationship. Anyway, the breakup itself wasn't messy. There was no shouting matches or cruel words exchanged. Kevin did push back a bit, but ultimately he accepted. I also didn't worry about seeing him at work since we were on different floors and we rarely crossed paths. Life went back to normal after the breakup. I focused on my work, spent time with my pets, and then went out with friends. However, a couple of weeks later, I received a text message from Kevin. He asked me to meet him at a specific area of the park that we used to visit together. He said that he just wanted to talk. I didn't think much of it at that time. I figured that he might want to talk things over or ask to get back together. I wasn't interested in rekindling the relationship, but I thought that it would be kind to explain things to him in person, calmly and rationally. But as the date approached, I started to feel uneasy. I don't know why, but something about the situation didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that I might be in danger. Trusting my instincts, I called my older brother and explained the whole situation to him. Let me tell you about my brother. My brother is a tall, strong guy who is very active in sports and weightlifting. He's the kind of person who can intimidate most people with just his presence. But he's actually a caring and sweet man. My brother then suggested that he would go with me. He said that he will keep a bit of distance, so we still have our privacy, but he wants to be able to keep an eye on me just in case that things go south. On the night of our meetup, my brother picked me up and we drove to the park. We were running late for some reason that I can clearly remember now. I told my brother the exact location, and he dropped me off near the spot while he went to find parking. I hurried to the bench where Kevin and I used to sit. But when I got there, Kevin wasn't around yet, so I just sat on the bench waiting for him. I noticed how eerily quiet and empty the park was. I never went to the park at that hour, so I never knew. But suddenly, I heard some rustling behind me. I turned around and I see 3 men emerging from the trees behind the bench. They had masks covering their mouths and they stared at me intensely. My heart sank and a wave of nausea hit me. It didn't take long to realize that this was a trap set up by Kevin. I started to panic, unsure of what to do, and the men closed in and I felt utterly helpless. And just then, I heard a booming voice yell, "Who the hell are you guys? Get the hell away from my sister!" It was my brother. He was running towards us, and the sight of his massive, intimidating frame must have freaked the men out. They hadn't expected anyone else to be there, let alone someone who could easily overpower them. They took off running, disappearing into the darkness. To be honest, in my panic state, I even forgot my brother was there. But I thank whatever stars I have that he was there and that I listened to my gut feeling a couple of days ago. I ran to my brother and then we got out of there as quickly as possible. My brother then drove me back home and we talked about what had happened. We debated calling the cops but ultimately decided against it, thinking that we didn't have enough proof that it was Kevin who orchestrated the whole thing. But deep down, I knew it was him. Looking back, I realized how foolish I was to meet him in the first place, but I had no idea that he was capable of something so horrible. A few days after the incident, I found out that Kevin had quit the company and no one knew where he was. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I was relieved but also scared, knowing that he was out there somewhere. I thank God for my brother, because I don't know what would have happened to me if he hadn't been there. I still get nightmares about that night, imagining what could have happened if my brother hadn't shown up in time. So, to everyone, all I can say is listen to that inner voice that tells you that something isn't right. I was just a sophomore in high school, and I fell head over heels for the new quiet kid and thought that he was my forever. Crazy, but I would actually go on marrying down the road just 1 week after graduation. High school sweethearts. Looking back now, I can see how many red flags I noticed but ignored because I was young and eagerly wanting to be grown up. Well, fast forward, the night before my wedding day, I was going over last-minute wedding details with my mom, who is easily one of the most caring and selfless people that I know. So bless my sweet mama's heart when I asked her if she'd be mad if I decided that I didn't want to go through with the wedding. The wedding was the next day, but me being me, and mom thought that I was messing with her, I couldn't tell her the truth of what was going on now. So I took a deep breath and I forced a believable chuckle. She genuinely thought that I was just pulling another one of my jokes. I went on to finally tell her the truth almost a year after I escaped him, and she still feels bad for not taking it seriously. No one knew what was going on behind closed doors, but makes sense. I was honestly his biggest PR team. Only 2 hours passed in saying I do's. He was throwing me out of the truck in my parents' driveway, cussing and yelling that he wanted a divorce. He was then recklessly driving off. So much for all that honeymoon phase on our actual honeymoon. I ran inside and my dad came out of the bedroom, and he couldn't understand a word that I was saying, but he is trying to basically ask me what was happening, and I say it as clear as I could while uncontrollably sobbing. He left me. How could he? On our honeymoon. My dad is pissed, but then he relaxed and tried to rationalize the situation, like maybe he forgot something, or pulling a bad joke or something like that. And then we see his truck flying in our driveway, and my dad smiles and says, "See, he's right there." I wipe my tears and I walk out of the door and tell them yes, that it was a prank. But inside I was screaming. I was so embarrassed for myself because now I looked crazy. But if I wanted to save this relationship, they could never know the truth. Months go by and he starts being sweeter ever since we had to be in a long-distance relationship because he was in the military at training. But soon, I would be packing up my life and moving to Texas with him. I could tell that my parents were starting to see the cracks that I had worked so hard to glue together. My mom even picked up my phone on the table, mistaking it for hers, and saw this huge message from my ex, crying and begging me to stay because he was not a good person. But I assured her that this was way out of character for him, which was a lie, and that he was just lonely. I knew that she didn't believe me, but she also knew that I was stubborn and I was going to do whatever regardless of her concerns. After just a few weeks in Texas, I knew my life was in danger. It was Thanksgiving that day, and my family just called to check up on us and just tell us happy Thanksgiving. And the moment that I hung up, the man that I thought was my soulmate just started cussing at me and saying that I need to stop talking to my family because he was my only family now. I let out a little chuckle thinking that he's gotta be joking. And then he picks up our wedding glasses, which I specifically had made for us, and then he throws it directly at me, shattering around me. Shocked, I didn't know what to do. So I walked over to the broom and I just start sweeping up the broken glass. You may read this and think, surely he would be done throwing a tantrum by now, right? But no. He then throws pictured frames at me while I'm sweeping up the glass. Honestly, that broken glass on the wooden floor was just a metaphor for any love that I had left towards this man. I broke that night, and I stopped seeing him as my other half, and more as the monster that I'm now stuck with. I became very depressed, and he loved that. He would break me down over and over again just to get a reaction. 2 months go by, and one night, he completely lost his shit over the washer and dryer people messing up the days that they were supposed to come out, and he started pacing back and forth, mumbling words that I couldn't quite make out. But then he demanded that I call and fix it. He grabbed me and sat me on the couch, telling me what to say and that I better not fuck it up, like a damn negotiation. This man was paranoid as hell, making comments that they were doing it because he was a soldier. And then he started blaming me, even though I wasn't even around him when he called the place in the first place. But he still yelled at me for hours. He walked to the bedroom, and I'm still on the couch still processing that moment. He said, "You're so stupid. This is all your fault. Did you plan this with the workers just to make me look dumb? Or are you really just that dumb? Huh? You bitch?" That's what I fucking thought. You're no good. You're just an ungrateful bitch. I said, "You know what? I'm done. You won't do anything except complain and bitch at me, blaming me for everything, and all you do is cuss and yell at me for no damn reason." He looked at me with this look that I've heard other victims try and describe, and the best that I can describe it is a darkness in his eyes. Like an emptiness that still causes me nightmares to this day. And without hesitation, he lunges at me in the middle of the day with our curtains open, with our door wide open, and our neighbors out and about. He then throws me against the wall and starts choking me. I slowly see black, but then he lets go for a second because then he slammed my entire body to the floor. At that moment, I either blacked out or my brain was trying to shield myself from what was happening. But piece by piece, I would come to, and he was holding me by my shoulders and just repeatedly slamming me on the wooden floor. My screams ignored by the people outside, and I pleaded for anyone to call the police, and I repeated yelling for help over and over and over again. My fight or flight takes over and then chooses flight. I run to the main bathroom, and I lock the door, frantically calling my mom because I'm in that moment that I just wanted to hear her voice. And sure, if that would be my last. But my poor mom didn't know the nightmare of that phone call until it was too late. She was with my sister and dad, and then she put me on speakerphone because we usually do this so they can all talk to me like we were all there together. But instead, they hear me screaming for my life and hear my ex calling me awful names and telling me to get my ass in there and to unlock the door. They were so confused, and my dad was ready to come and kill this asshole himself. But then silence. No more banging, just me softly crying and just trying to calm my mother over the phone that I am all right and that I know that I need to leave him, but that I had to do it in the safest way possible because if he were to catch me, I may not make it out with my life. When I walk out of the room, my ex is just sitting there with a blank stare like nothing had happened. There was a theme throughout our 3-year relationship, but I could no longer ignore the escalation of his behavior. So one night, I finally put my escape plan into action. I was gonna make a run for it. It was 2 a.m. Keys to my Pontiac were on the kitchen table, and he was asleep in the bedroom that I wasn't allowed in several days earlier. I then busted out of the guest bedroom that was my prison, and then I beelined out the front door quietly, but also as quickly as possible. 9.5 hours to my home state, and I only stopped once in Dallas to fill up on gas. With every mile in my rearview mirror, I felt something inside that reassured me. I'm free now. Forever scared, but most have healed or faded. I 100% believe that if I have stayed, I would be 6 feet deep now. So, to my abusive ex-husband that I fled from that late February night, let's not meet again, ever. So my senior year of high school, I dated this guy. Let's call him Tom. We dated for over a year. The relationship was not good. We were always breaking up and then getting back together. We were fighting a lot, and he also threatened me a lot. It was just overall very toxic. His parents also had a very rocky relationship. His dad was an alcoholic and beat on his mom most nights. I even witnessed it when I spent the night there on rare occasions. It was scary. And toward the end of the senior year, Tom cheated on me at his birthday party. So again, we broke up, and months later we tried to get back together. But I just realized that I just didn't like him anymore, and I called it quits for good. That was 15 years ago, and that was the last time that I saw him. I've since heard that he became an alcoholic just like his dad, that he became very violent, and he wound up in a mental hospital. I wasn't sure on the details on this, but I had heard that he might be schizophrenic. 9 years ago, I met my now husband. We've been happily married for 4 years and have a 2-year-old and another one on the way. Maybe about a year ago now, I got a random text message asking my name. I get work calls and texts on my personal phone, so I just answered, "Yes?" And they wrote back, "How are you?" I should mention that I've had the same number since high school. I just didn't respond because I didn't know who it was, and at this point I figured that it wasn't something having to do with work. But then, a few minutes later, I got another text that said, "It's Tom. How are you?" When I tell you, I absolutely gasped. I responded, "I'm well. I hope you are too." He then wrote again and asked, "What are you doing?" Again, I didn't respond. A minute later, I get a follow-up message from him that said, "Do you ever think about us? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we were still together? Do you ever think about getting back together?" I sat in silence rereading these messages, unsure of how to respond. I finally just replied and said, "I'm sorry, Tom, but no, I'm married now, and I wish you the best, but I don't think we should have any form of communication." He just responded with okay and apologized. I thought that it was weird, but whatever. Maybe the dude was lonely and decided to reach out, but who knows. Last week, his mother showed up at my family business. I've worked here since high school in different roles. She and his father had gotten a divorce, and she now has a boyfriend that she seems happy with. We exchanged pleasantries, and then she asked me, "Did you hear about Tom? He was in an institution." I said that I'd heard and that I was sorry to hear it. She said, "Well, he killed several animals, and that's why they ended up locking him up." Again, I said that I was sorry to hear that, but then she said, "Yeah, but he's out now. He's been for a while. You know, you were always my favorite girlfriend he had. Do you ever still think about him?" I wasn't sure what to say to this. I wanted to say, "Lady, that was in high school. No." Instead, I just said, "No, I'm married now with a toddler. I don't have much time to think about anything else." I guess I was just trying to lighten the mood. But she then said, "You know, he's not a bad guy. I don't see him that much anymore, but when I do, he still talks about you. He wonders what could have been. Would you ever be open to talking to him?" Well, that's when I shut things down. I told her that it was great to see her, but that option was off the table now and forever. I then said that I had to get back to work, and I walked away and hid in the back until she left. I mean, what the actual fuck? This high school relationship was years ago. I want no part of him or his family. I'm just sincerely hoping that he doesn't pop up at my place of work. I have no idea if he's still around the area, but I really, really hope that he isn't. Anyway, bizarre old high school boyfriend, let's not meet again. Hi everyone, my name is Chris and I'm 25 and male. I'm here to tell you about a terrifying and somewhat embarrassing story that I have. Please forgive me if I write some things a bit weirdly. I'm really not the best when it comes to writing. Anyway, let's start the story. Falling in love with Samantha, who was 22 and female, was like a dream come true. We met at a mutual friend's party, and from that night on, it felt like we were inseparable. She was everything that I have ever wanted. She was kind, thoughtful, and beautiful. Our relationship was the epitome of what you would call healthy and beautiful. We took care of each other, we shared our dreams, and we made plans for the future. After dating for a year, we decided to take the next step and then move in together. I know, some of you might think that it was too fast, but for me, I couldn't wait to just be with her all the time. Those first few months were nothing short of magical. We did everything as a couple, cooking meals together, we had weekend getaways, and we were cuddling up for movie nights. We spent lazy Sundays in our jammies. We were playing board games and, just enjoying each other's company. It really felt like a perfect match, like everything had just fallen into place. It felt like I have finally met the one that I was going to spend the rest of my life with. But as time went on, something shifted. It wasn't gradual. It was like someone had flipped a switch. By the 7th month of living together, the dynamic between us had completely changed. We stopped caring about each other in the way that we used to. Where there had been once love and affection, there was now apathy and irritation. It happened so suddenly that it was jarring. We started getting annoyed with each other's presence, snapping at the smallest things. I couldn't stand the way she left her shoes in the hallway, and she hated the way that I absent-mindedly left dishes in the sink. Our once cozy home turned into a battleground, if I may say, and every little annoyance became a reason for a screaming match between the two of us. Intimacy completely vanished. We went from being a couple who couldn't keep their hands off each other to barely acknowledging each other's presence. There were days when we wouldn't even speak to each other at all. The silence between us was just heavy and suffocating. I don't know why we stayed together despite the obvious signs that it was over. Maybe it was just because neither of us knew how to end it. Or maybe it was the looming specter of our lease that had just a couple of months left. We were both just waiting it out, I guess, hoping to avoid the discomfort of a breakup until the lease was up. But everything came to a head one day when we fought over something as trivial as dishes in the sink. The argument escalated quickly, and we started another screaming match with each other. And in the heat of the moment, I thought to myself, "Oh God, I hate this woman." And that was when it clicked for me. I couldn't continue being in a relationship where I harbored these kinds of thoughts. I told her that we should end it, and she agreed. We decided to just wait for the lease to be up, but I already moved my stuff to the spare bedroom that night. We hadn't spoken a word for a week after that. Living in the same space with someone you once loved but now couldn't stand was a new kind of torture. One day, I was feeling bored and somewhat lonely, So I decided to download the dating app. I mean, I was already single. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just some people to chat with. I matched with a few women and I started talking to them. But there was this one girl that I really connected with. We hit it off and we decided to take our conversation out of the app. We exchanged numbers and started talking on the phone, sometimes for hours. It was refreshing to have a friendly voice to talk to, a distraction from the tense atmosphere that I had at home. Do take note that during my relationship with Samantha, I have never cheated on her, nor did I ever think that she cheated on me. This all happened weeks after me and Samantha finally called quits on the relationship. One night, while I was on the phone with the new girl in my room, I heard a loud banging on my door. It startled me. It wasn't a normal kind of banging. It sounded like someone was using a heavy object to hit the door. So I ended the call abruptly. And then came the yelling. It was Samantha. She was screaming and calling me names. She accused me of cheating on her, her voice filled with rage and hysteria. The noise was deafening. I could hear things breaking outside my door, glass shattering, objects crashing to the floor. And despite being a man, I knew that I didn't have the strength to stop Samantha in her state. I was just horrified. I genuinely thought that I was going to get hurt that night. So I did the only logical thing that I could think of, and that was to call the police. They arrived within minutes, thanks to a neighbor who had already called them after hearing the commotion. The neighbors actually called in for a noise complaint. The officers came in and then detained Samantha until she calmed down. 2 officers spoke to her while one talked to me, and I explained everything, my voice shaking as I recounted the ordeal. To be honest, in my head, I was terrified that Samantha would make up lies and blame everything on me, but luckily she didn't. After everything was sorted out, I decided to just leave that night. The police waited while I packed my things and I loaded everything into my car. As I drove away, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I stopped by a gas station to buy some snacks and I called my parents to explain what had happened. They were understanding and offered to let me move back in with them. I then blocked Samantha on all my social media accounts and I changed my phone number. Thankfully, she didn't try to contact me again. The entire experience left me shaken, and I just knew that I wouldn't be dating anyone anytime soon. So, to Samantha, the woman that I once loved, who turned my life into a nightmare, I hope that I never see you again. The creepy guy I dated for a while is a murderer. As a teenager, I waited tables in a local restaurant to pay for the gas for my car. That's where I met Mr. Creep, let's call him that. In my naive mind, he seemed normal at first, despite the fact that he was 20 and wanting to date a 17-year-old. Leaving my job after dark scared me, so I taught myself to get in my car, shut the door, and lock it in one fluid motion, and it made me feel safe. One night, while I was leaving work, I had just gotten into my car when Mr. Creep seemed to just appear out of nowhere, yanking my door handle to try and open it. I looked into his eyes in the split second before he smiled, and what I saw absolutely chilled my bones. I don't know how to describe the evil that I saw. I just rolled down the window a crack and then faked a laugh when he said something about wanting to see if he could scare me, and then I just used my curfew as an excuse to get away. From then on, I was terrified of him, but I didn't let on because I was afraid of what he might do if I told him that I never wanted to see him again. After this, he constantly lied to try to impress me and try to invent ways of being alone with me. But my instinct was to run, so I tried my best to avoid him. About 2 weeks after this incident, the restaurant got robbed, and there was significant evidence against Mr. Creep, but it was just not the kind that allowed the cops to charge him. I tried sending all of my text conversations with Mr. Creep to the police chief in hopes that it would help. But Mr. Creep just slithered away after that, and I always had to look over my shoulder. About 5 years ago, he messaged me on Facebook out of the blue. He went on about his top secret military clearance, as well as a huge acreage he owned. It made me nervous, and I felt like he was trying to spring a trap or something, but I tried to put it out of my mind. And then today, I was looking at posts about an unsolved murder when I saw his mugshot. He is now facing murder charges as well as 2 other violent felony charges. I am so glad to know that he's locked up now, but I am so overwhelmed about how correct my instincts were about Mr. Creep. I feel like I escaped him. My name is Matthew, and I'm 30 years old. I met Kimberly when I was 26. We were introduced through a mutual friend, Richard, who had been my best friend since college. Kimberly and I had an instant connection, the kind that you read about in novels. We were that couple who finished each other's sentences and shared inside jokes that made others feel like outsiders. It was even so cheesy to the point where I can't even believe it. Richard, who was also 26 at that time, was incredibly supportive of our relationship. He seemed genuinely happy for us, often joining us for outings and gatherings, and I valued his friendship deeply. He was like a brother to me. For a long time, it felt like I was living in a dream. Kimberly, Richard, and I formed a close-knit trio. We spent countless weekends together, hiking, dining out, and even vacationing as a group. My life literally felt perfect. But perfect never lasts, and I was too blinded by love to see the cracks forming beneath the surface. The first signs of trouble were small, almost insignificant. Kimberly started making quirky comments about how Richard and I had such a strong friendship. She would say things like, "You two are practically inseparable," with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At that time, I thought she was just being playful. But these comments became more frequent, and gradually, they took on a more critical tone. She started suggesting that Richard didn't respect our relationship and that he was a bad influence on me. I brushed off her concerns, thinking that she was just being overly protective. Richard had been my friend for years, and I couldn't imagine him having any ill intentions. But Kimberly's words planted a seed of doubt in my mind. I began to analyze Richard's actions more critically, looking for any signs of disrespect or betrayal. And this was just the beginning of a manipulation that I didn't yet recognize. It wasn't long before Kimberly's influence began to affect my behavior. I started declining Richard's invitations to hang out, choosing instead to spend time with Kimberly alone. She would often claim that she felt uncomfortable when Richard was around, saying that he made her feel like a third wheel. I wanted to make her happy, so I distanced myself from Richard, thinking that it was the right thing to do for my relationship. Months passed, and my social circle began to shrink. Friends who had once been close seemed distant, wary even. Kimberly always had an explanation though. She would tell me that they were jealous of our relationship or that they had said things behind my back. I trusted her completely and I took her words at face value. Confronting my friend seemed unnecessary. After all, Kimberly was the woman that I loved. As my friendships deteriorated, my dependence on Kimberly increased. She became my entire world, the only person that I felt that I could trust. But as our relationship deepened, so did the manipulation. She started questioning my memory, insisting that I had said or done things that I couldn't recall. Simple disagreements turned into elaborate blame games, with her always emerging as the victim. I seriously began to doubt my own sanity, relying on her perception of events rather than my own. Richard tried to intervene a few times, expressing concern about my relationship with Kimberly. But his words fell on deaf ears. I saw his attempts as meddling, convinced by Kimberly that he was trying to sabotage our happiness. My once close friend became a stranger to me, someone that I viewed with suspicion and resentment. The isolation was complete when Kimberly suggested that we move in together. She painted a picture of a perfect life, just the two of us, free from the negativity of others. I, of course, agreed, thinking that it would strengthen our relationship and bring us closer. But moving in only magnified the problems. Kimberly's control over my life became more apparent. She monitored my activities, questioned my interactions, and she criticized my own decisions. I felt trapped, but I couldn't see a way out. One day, while I was cleaning a drawer of mine, I found a group photo from a few years back. It was taken during one of our outings with Richard and a few other friends. Looking at that photo, I felt sad. I realized how much I missed my friends and the carefree times that we had shared. It was a moment of clarity, just a brief escape from the fog of manipulation that had clouded my mind. So I secretly decided to reach out to Richard. It was a hesitant, tentative step, driven by a longing for the friendship that we once had. I wasn't sure if Richard was going to accept me, given all the things that I have done to him. But to my surprise, he was receptive. He listened without judgment as I poured out my confusion and my doubts. He assured me that he had never said anything against me and that he had always wanted the best for me. His words were like a balm to my wounded soul, but they also amplified the realization of how much that I had lost. As I rekindled my friendship with Richard, Kimberly's behavior became more erratic. She sensed a change in my behavior and intensified her efforts to control me. The arguments escalated and her accusations became more severe. It was a really difficult time for me, but with Richard's support, I began to see the manipulation for what it was, and I started standing up for myself, questioning Kimberly's narratives and asserting myself. The breaking point came was when Kimberly learned that I reconnected with Richard, and then she accused Richard of trying to seduce her. It was an outrageous claim, one that shattered the final remnants of my trust in her. I confronted her for the first time, truly challenging her manipulations. Her facade crumbled, revealing the extent of her lies. The confrontation was messy and painful. Kimberly tried to turn the tables, playing the victim and accusing me of betraying her. But I was no longer blinded by her manipulation. I really did love Kimberly. But I found the strength to end the toxic relationship. It was difficult, one that left me feeling both free and heartbroken. The weeks that followed were a period of healing and self-discovery. Richard stood by me, helping me rebuild my life and reconnect with old friends. It was a slow process, and it was filled with a lot of moments of doubt and insecurity. My relationship with Richard grew stronger. He never once said, "I told you so." Instead, he supported me with unwavering loyalty and understanding. My other friendships gradually mended too, as people saw that I was working on my life and distancing myself from the toxic relationship. Looking back, I realized how easily I had fallen into the trap that Kimberly had set up for me. It was a humbling experience, one that taught me the importance of self-awareness and putting up healthy boundaries. Eventually, I moved to a new city. Of course, Richard and I and our other friends stayed in touch. Years passed, and I met someone new. This time, I approached the relationship with caution and self-awareness, mindful of the lessons that I had learned. And I could feel that this time, it was a healthy and genuine connection. No manipulation, no lies, and I felt a sense of peace. As I reflect on the past, I am grateful for the support of friends like Richard. Kimberly's manipulation had been a dark chapter in my life, but it doesn't define me. So, to Kimberly, I hope one day you reflect on yourself, maybe get some therapy if you think you need it. And to the others, thank you for reading this, but I just want to remind you to not throw away your friendship so easily, like I did. Life has a funny way of pushing you to your limits. And when I decided to move to a new city after a particularly ugly breakup, I thought that I was making a fresh start. Little did I know that the past has a way of creeping back into your life, no matter how far you run. I'm Lyra. I'm 27 and female. The relationship I had has been a roller coaster, filled with highs that made me feel invincible and lows that left me questioning my sanity. When it finally ended, it wasn't mutual. It was messy, complicated, and filled with accusations and regrets. My ex, Mark, 28 and male, wasn't willing to let things go easily. The months following our breakup were filled with incessant calls, a lot of messages, and unexpected visits. I realized that I needed to create some distance from him and regain control over my life. It was just getting too toxic for me, and it was messing with my mental health. So, moving to a new city seemed like the best solution. I found a cozy one-bedroom apartment in a bustling neighborhood, complete with friendly neighbors and a sense of anonymity that was very refreshing. It has been a stressful couple of months, but the move was cathartic. It was a way to reclaim my life and my independence. For the first few months, everything was perfect. I found a new job, I made new friends, and for the first time in a long time, I finally felt like I was at peace. But then, it started very subtly. At first, I didn't think much of the small changes in my apartment. I'm naturally forgetful, so when I found my favorite coffee mug in a different cupboard or my keys on the kitchen counter instead of the hallway table, I chalked it up to my scatterbrained nature. But as time went on, these little inconsistencies became harder to ignore. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find my living room window slightly ajar. I distinctly remember closing it that morning, as the weather forecast said that it was going to rain. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I dismissed it as my imagination just playing tricks on me. Maybe I had left it open and simply forgotten about it, and just thought that I closed it. But then, there were the messages. Mark had stopped trying to contact me directly after I moved, which was a relief. But I began receiving anonymous texts from an unknown number. Initially, they were innocuous, just generic greetings and questions about my day. But they quickly turned invasive. The sender seemed to know too much about my daily routine, my new friends, even the layout of my apartment. I blocked the number, but the messages continued from different numbers, almost as if the sender had unlimited resources to keep reaching out to me. It was really freaking me out. I started feeling watched. It was an unsettling sensation, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I don't know if you've tried that before, but in my opinion, it's a horrible feeling. Every time that I would walk home from work, I would glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me. But there was never anyone there. It was just the city life, strangers going about their business, not knowing about my paranoia. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On my nightstand, next to my favorite book, was an old photo of Mark and me. It was from the happier times. It was a picture that I had torn up and thrown away before I moved. Seeing it there, perfectly intact, felt like a violation. It was a clear message. Mark had found me, and he had been in my apartment. I'm not stupid, so I went to the police directly with the photo and the couple text messages that I haven't erased yet. But with no concrete evidence to prove that it was Mark, there was little that they could do. So I tried doing the logical step. I changed my locks, I hired a locksmith, and I felt a brief sense of security. But the feeling was short-lived. The next time that I came home, I found another photo. This one of me sleeping, taken from the inside of my apartment. The realization that Mark had a key, again, to my new place despite the lock change was terrifying. I didn't understand how he could do this. Every creak of my old apartment now felt like a potential threat to me. I started sleeping with a chair wedged against the bedroom door. My phone was always clutched tightly in my hand. My friends even noticed the change in me. They were asking me all the time if everything was all right. But I was somewhat too embarrassed to admit the truth. So I just kept it to myself. It just felt like if I admit it out loud, then it made everything too real. And part of me wanted to believe that it was all in my head, that maybe I'm just too paranoid, or maybe I'm just going crazy. The tension reached its peak one rainy night when I had just settled into bed, the sound of the rain pattering against the window like a soothing backdrop. When I heard it, a faint click. It was the sound of my front door opening. I almost didn't hear it because of the rain, but I think I was just hyper aware all the time, and that's why I was able to catch that sound. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to hear. My breath caught in my throat. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, and they made their way down the hallway. I knew it was Mark. I mean, who else could it be? The intruder moved, like they know the exact layout of my apartment, like they've been there multiple times before. It was great that I already had my phone on me, so with trembling hands, I dialed 911 and I whispered my situation to the operator. I could hear the intruder moving closer. I stayed as quiet as possible, praying that the police would arrive in time. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. The handle turned, but the chair wedged against it held firm. There was a moment of silence followed by a frustrated grunt. The intruder tried the handle again, shaking the door violently. And a couple of minutes later, I heard it. The sounds of the sirens in the distance was the most beautiful thing that I have ever heard. In that moment, the intruder must have heard them too, because the door handle stopped rattling and I heard hurried footsteps retreating. By the time the police arrived, the apartment was empty and the front door stood open, rainwater pooling on that welcome mat. The police found no trace of the intruder and no signs of forced entry. They took my statement and promised to patrol the area more frequently, and they just told me to call them back if something happens. But I knew that wasn't enough. Mark was so determined, and as long as he knew where I lived, I would never be safe. So, I chose the hard route. I decided to move again. This time, without telling anyone except my immediate family. I found a new apartment in a different part of the city, and I changed my phone number. And I deactivated all my social media accounts. The process was exhausting, both physically and emotionally. I was being drained from everything that was happening to me, and I didn't know what to do. I felt helpless. For a while, things seemed to improve. The messages stopped, and there were no more signs of Mark's presence. So I kind of started to relax, letting my guard down, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe again. But then, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I received a package. It was simple, a small brown box with no return address. My curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside was a single item. Another photo of me sleeping, taken from the inside of my new apartment. Panic just washed over me, and I just fell down on the floor and started bawling my eyes. Despite all my efforts, Mark had found me again. I realized then that I couldn't keep running. Mark's obsession had become a dangerous game of cat and mouse, one that I was tired of playing. I didn't want to do this anymore. So I contacted the police again, this time providing them with every piece of evidence that I had collected, the photos, the messages, everything. They took my case more seriously, assigning an officer to check on me regularly. Days passed, and I haven't heard anything from Mark. The days turned into weeks, and while I remained on edge, there were no further signs. The serious police presence seemed to deter him. Perhaps he had finally realized that his behavior would land him in serious trouble. I also don't know why I didn't think of this before, but one good friend of mine suggested putting cameras all over the place, in the front door, inside my apartment, just to make sure that if he ever comes inside again, I can catch proof of him and I can finally have evidence to use against him. But months passed without incident. I started going to therapy. My therapist helped me understand that Mark's actions were not my fault and that I deserved to live without fear. I think going to therapy was really helpful. I made new friends, I reconnected with the old ones, and I even started dating again. Each step felt like a victory. Yet, in the back of my mind, there was always a shadow of doubt, a lingering fear that Mark would suddenly resurface again. One evening, as I was walking home from work, I noticed a man standing across the street, partially concealed by the shadows. But when I looked closer, I realized that it wasn't Mark. It was just a stranger, someone who had no interest in me. The realization was a small victory, a reminder that not every shadow held a threat against me. As time went on, the fear slowly went away and I learned to trust again, to let people into my life without the constant worry of betrayal. I still took precautions, of course, changing my locks regularly, being mindful of my surroundings, having cameras around my house, but I no longer let the fear control me. Years passed and I finally built a life for me. I got married, I have children now, and I found a career that I am passionate about. This happened years ago, and the only reason why I'm writing about this now is because the other day, I received a letter. An old friend passed it to me and said that it was from Mark. It was handwritten, and it was filled with apologies and explanations. He claimed to have changed, to have found redemption and a new purpose in life. He begged for my forgiveness, hoping to close the chapter on his own terms. I read the letter once, then twice, and finally, I just tore it up and threw it away. Mark had taken enough from me. He didn't deserve my forgiveness or my time. I had moved on, and I wasn't about to let him back into my life even in the smallest way. So, to Mark, my crazy ex-boyfriend who haunted my life for so long, I hope we would never meet again. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared because your fear feeds me.